Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Kovach, and I'm the Executive Director of the American International Accreditation Association of Schools and Colleges, AIAASC. This morning, this evening, this afternoon, depending on where you are, we have a presentation from Edmentum, one of our trusted partners. And that presentation to commence momentarily is on using ExactPath, one of the tools for them for Edmentum, for assessment purposes. As a premier American education accrediting organization that provides American-style accreditation and professional development resources to over 200 schools worldwide, one of our requirements, as all good accreditors have, is to have external assessment. Our organization is dedicated to student-centered and engaged learning, and we work with schools around the world to meet our standards of good practice and who demonstrate this type of commitment to strategic planning, continuous improvement, outcomes assessment, environmental and social responsibility, and high-quality student services. As part of our responsibility to our school members, we provide resources that assist schools in increasing quality and improving the administrative processes, enhancing student success. Another example is that we are the only accreditor that has a hub of the Open Educational Resource Platform that contains for our school members and faculty in those schools thousands of teaching resources with test banks and project ideas, curriculum materials, and multimedia resources. In addition, we have partners who provide teacher recruitment services and credential verification, as well as university admission services for students wishing to apply to study in the US. Today, we are here with one of these trusted partners, Edmentum, for this presentation on the importance of assessment and how schools can increase student progress while creating personalized learning paths. Their adaptive learning path program creates data that can be used to report student progress and to attain and for attainment between diagnostic assessments. It's my pleasure to introduce Hannah and Gareth. Both of them work in international implementation and partnerships and development. And I turn this evening's presentation over to both Gareth and Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ronald, and hi, everybody. Yeah, as was mentioned, my name's Gareth, and I'm the Partnership Development Manager here at Edmentum. And with me is Hannah, who's the Implementation Specialist here at Edmentum too. So I'm going to start off, first of all, with a bit of a presentation and a few slides to go through to talk through a little bit about our assessment and our learning path. And in between, Hannah will be taking us through the actual program itself and how it works in a little bit more detail. So let me just set this up and share my sound. Okay. As educators, our number one concern should be learning and how we can create the conditions that enable children to flourish and reach their full potential. If we are successful and put our focus and our energies into this, then it becomes easy to demonstrate the success we are adding as a school. Proving our performance and improving our performance is critical, and this is why accurate, reliable assessment data is vital to a school's success. You'll notice that the student in this is in the center of this diagram. This is because they are the most important people in school and where we must focus our attention if we hope to improve the school. Data comes in many different forms: benchmarking data, summative data, formative data, and data that measures attainment, cognitive ability, and well-being. And they are all vitally important. And when we combine that, and they can really begin to help us understand each individual student story, so we know where we should focus our attention to help them improve. For example, we may have a very bright student who is underachieving because of SEL issues in the school. Far too many schools I work with aren't using their data effectively enough to improve learning. Colleagues can sort it and present it visually to show me how grade 9 boys are doing in math, for example, which is important, but they fail to show me how they are using this data to improve the quality of teaching and learning that is taking place in the classrooms. This most important part is how they are using this data to help teachers, help students improve. During this presentation, we'll show you how you can use the data to explain individual student stories and make it actionable so that learning can be personalized for every learner and the quality of teaching and learning taking place in the school can improve. We want our data to provide insightful analysis, informed action, and improved outcomes. And to that, Tom Sheringham tells us that the assessment must impact the learning process and provide a next step which keeps learners focused, motivates them, increases the level of challenge, and gives them actionable feedback. I'll start, if I may, by introducing you to my daughter, Amelia. She's in grade 4, and 4 months ago, she completed Edmentum's exact path diagnostic assessment. This has been the starting point for her of a personal journey of improvement and growth that has led to increased confidence and a newfound enjoyment of school life. This was Amelia's starting point, a starting point that measured by exact path diagnostic. As you can see, her national percentile rank, or NPR, scores were far from exceptional. NPR compares a student to US norms. A national percentile rank, or NPR, of 66% means she is better than 66% of the children in her grade level in the US, but worse than 34%. So English language arts was a significant weakness. Amelia then spent a significant amount of time in her exact path learning path, a personalized learning path of content designed to help her grow. She spent 11 hours in math, 22 hours in English language arts, and 21 hours in reading. She mastered in total 93 skills in her learning path. As you can see from the second diagnostic, her results have improved significantly. She's completed all of the grade 4 standards, and she's now working on grade 5 content. She's done this in 4 months. She is now in the top 2% nationally in math, the top 11% in reading, and the top 3% in ELA English language arts. She's had a phenomenal growth and is now attaining really good results. Exact Path hasn't just worked for Amelia, it is being used by 5 million learners around the world. And this is just a sample of the schools and organizations that we work with. All are using Exact Path solutions to accelerate learning in math, reading, and language arts. You'll notice that while some of these schools have a multinational intake, such as Universal American, we're also embedded and having a positive impact on learning with schools who have 100% Emirati intake. AIAASC charter schools, Dubai schools, and ADNOC schools, all 100% Emirati children who are Arabic first language. Lee is the head teacher of Summit International School in Abu Dhabi. His schools use Exact Path before, during, and after the COVID-19 lockdown, and all of his children are on grade level and have no learning gaps. And here's a little video excerpt from Lee.
We did not see a skills gap as a result of blended learning or COVID or online learning. Socially, we have, I think everybody has. But as far as our language and our reading and our math, we have not seen that. As Sarah said, similar to Sarah's situation, we were all digital prior to the pandemic. So our students were comfortable with this format. When we first started the pandemic, the request from authorities was not to do too much screen time, to back off. So we upped our Exact Path usage in order to kind of supplement the time the students would have with reading and language and math with their teachers. And like I said, as it's turned out over a year and a half now, we didn't see the skills gap. But this also speaks to the idea of The students have to get accustomed to it.
ExactPath is also recognized as best in class by the industry and has won of a significant number of awards over the last few years. It has won the Remote Learning Awards, Primary Education Tech and Learning Award of Excellence, and the Tech Advocate winner for the Best Personalized Learning Solution. And it's at this point I'll hand over to my colleague Hannah, who will firstly discuss the diagnostic assessment. At this stage, it's important to say that it is accepted by all accreditation bodies as an assessment, including AIAASC. Remember, this is the first part of the journey. The second part is the creation of the individual learning path for every student. ExactPath can use its own diagnostic to do that, or we can integrate schools' existing map data as well. So let me stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Hannah.
Thank you, Gareth. I will just share my screen, so do bear with me just a moment. Okay. Hello, everybody. So we'll start with the diagnostic assessment today. The diagnostic assessment is an adaptive assessment that can be administered to your students for math, reading and language arts, as Gareth has already mentioned here today. The assessments are tailored questions designed to identify each student's ability and their levels. This visual that we're looking at the moment, my apologies. My apologies there. The PowerPoint presentation that we're looking at the moment gives you a visualization of what you can expect when a teacher is reviewing a student's diagnostic assessment. The diagnostic assessment itself is designed to provide a numerous amount of questions to a student that will adapt throughout their delivery. So as the student begins to answer the questions, if the student answers any questions incorrect, the assessment will automatically adjust depending on the outcome and the answers that they provide, and begin to either provide higher grade level content or slightly lower grade content, depending on the answers that they give. And as the assessment progresses, the diagnostic assessment and the algorithm will then determine the exact academic level of each student across the 3 different subjects. So when we look at this from a class perspective, okay, teachers are able to look at the class results to gain an average understanding of their students' abilities. Now, once the students have completed their diagnostic assessment, each child is then provided with an individualized and personalized learning path to meet their academic levels. When a teacher reviews the data that has been collected from the diagnostic assessment, teachers are able to understand exactly how long they've been spending within their diagnostic assessment, the amount of questions that they've had, the domains and skills that they have been presented with. Each child's diagnostic assessment will differ. There'll be a different amount of time being spent because it is tailored to their outcome and their needs. Now, teachers are able to dive much deeper into the diagnostic results once the students have completed each diagnostic assessment. Not only that, they are also able to compare the diagnostic assessments throughout the year to review the students' growth. The first area that, and Gareth did mention this, was the national percentile rank. This actually allows the teachers to compare their students against other students within the same grade level. So for example, if a student has achieved 10th NPR, then they are 10% better than other students in the US in comparison, and then less than 90% than their peers within the same grade. Teachers are also able to monitor the students' growth and typical growth against their progression within their grade, as well as their grade level proficiency. Grade level proficiency enables a teacher to quickly and easily identify the students' progress in terms of their grade level, to ensure the students that are perhaps below grade level are provided with further support and intervention in order to bring them back up to the grade level expectations, but also highlighting those students that are excelling and exceeding within grade level. Furthermore, it then provides the teacher with their learning path entry grade starting point. So this is going to inform the teacher at what grade level within each domain the student will be starting at within their learning path. So teachers are always informed and have a clear visualization of the students' first steps, their progression, and their next steps. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes within the diagnostic account itself. So just bear with me a moment while I just change my screen over there. Okay, fantastic. So within the diagnostic exact path account, there's some fantastic opportunities for teachers to be able to review the students' data as well as our administrators. We can drill down from right down to an individual report, right the way across a school's outcome from each diagnostic assessment. I will now be starting with the class overview results, and this is what a teacher can expect once the students have completed their diagnostic assessments. First off, we have our class averages. Each child is provided a scale score. Now, the scale score is a figure that informs the teacher in terms of what their academic level is for each student. Now, in terms of when reviewing the class data, teachers can quickly identify the averages within their class or classes that they are overseeing in their teaching. In this scenario that we're looking at today, we can see that the highest scale score that was achieved within this math class was 1,151, whereas the lowest is 585. That then allows the average of 797. Now, when we look at providing additional diagnostic assessments throughout the year, the report that we're looking at the moment will then begin to show the teacher what type of progression they are seeing within each diagnostic assessment. So in this example, between diagnostic 1 and diagnostic 2, we have a scale score increase of 63. So it's really positive for the teacher to see within their class. Now, of course, that's an overview. It then provides us our grade level proficiency that we just discussed. So again, clearly identifying to the teacher what number of students in my class are currently below or approaching their grade level expectations, and how many of those students have taken the diagnostic assessment are now exceeding grade level expectations. Now we can dive much deeper, as I've already mentioned. We can now analyze individual students. Now I have a class here that a number of the students have taken multiple diagnostic assessments throughout the academic year, breaking down not only the grades that they are currently working at, so they're currently in, and the scale scores that they've achieved during their diagnostic assessments, but we then begin to see the growth that they have made. Now, within this chart, we can see details such as the national percentile rank, which, as we are aware, as already discussed, it's showing us our students in comparison to other students that are within the US. Now, next to this, we have a breakdown of each of the domains that will be covered during the student's diagnostic assessments and what their outcome or grade level that they achieved within that particular domain. And right at the end, we have this lowest LPEG. So that's the lowest grade that they have achieved within their diagnostic assessment. So therefore, we can say for Alberto, he will be starting at KG level within his math learning path in order to build on those learning gaps that were presented during the diagnostic assessment. Now, what we can also do from here is click into the individual students to gain a better understanding of the journey that they've taken within their diagnostic assessments and their next steps. So, for example, we have our overview that provides a breakdown of each of the diagnostic assessments, so the growth that Alberto has made during each of his assessments. But then we can click into the individual reports itself. Again, breaking down what their national percentile rank was to an overview of their diagnostic assessment. Now, there are thousands of questions that can be found within the diagnostic assessment, and each child will have a different experience. Excuse me. Therefore, we then present each child's diagnostic assessment in this visualization, as we looked at during my PowerPoint presentation. We can see that Alberto started off answering a couple of the first couple of questions incorrect. And therefore, if we hover over these, we can see what grade was asked, what domain, and how much time was spent within each of these questions. You'll notice as Alberto completes the diagnostic assessments, each of the types of questions that are asked change depending on their grade and domain, obviously depending on the outcome of the previous question. Until eventually the diagnostic or the algorithm within the diagnostic then determines Alberto's direct academic level within math, reading, and language arts. The diagnostic would then determine the student's next steps within their learning paths. And furthermore, if we scroll down here, the report finally then shows us a breakdown of each of the domains and skills that the students then covered during their diagnostic assessment. What grade did they achieve? And this will then stipulate the student's next steps in their learning path. Okay, so if I come back a step, all of the students' data and information, as I said before, from a teacher's perspective, can be pulled through these quick and easy reports and then dive deeper into the individual reports themselves. Now, if we're looking at this from an administrator's point of view, and I needed to know what maybe a grade level or maybe a school level has achieved across their diagnostic, how can I pull this information and be able to then compare that against past diagnostic assessments? Now, I have a report already pulled. Now, this is our diagnostic results report. This enables an administrator to utilize a variety of filters to drill down on the details that they need in more granular detail, okay, such as which classes, their grades, but then also allows the administrator to then compare diagnostic assessments 1, 2, 3, or 4 throughout the academic year. It's informing them of grade levels that were achieved, dates and times that the diagnostic assessment was completed, and the scale scores that the students then completed. The idea here is that the administrator, of course, can then begin to compare the progression that has been made, but also teachers can access this report as well. So if they needed that in a little bit more granular detail outside of ExactPath to export this information and determine students' next steps within their classroom environment, this report can also be pulled in that scenario as well. And again, informing the teacher of the grade level proficiency that the students are achieving throughout their diagnostic assessments. Now, these aspects are based on specific test windows within ExactPath. So it allows the teachers, the administrators to compare your winter, spring, fall data across that academic year and whether they are exceeding or meeting their expectations. Furthermore, we do have additional metrics such as our Lexile that we can also compare, and also our quantile metrics in there as well. So really thorough report that enables both teachers and administrators to dive deeper, extract that information and data from ExactPath based on each of the students' diagnostic assessments. Once the diagnostic assessments have then been completed, that's when the students' learning paths will then be generated into their account. And at this point, Gareth, I will hand back to you to take the next step.
Thanks, Hannah. So that next step, as Hannah mentioned, is that learning path process. So we've got all of our data, and now what do we do with it? And I spent a lot of time working closely with schools on how to embed personalized learning into the classroom. And that's what we want to focus on as part of that learning path. And here's just a selection of the questions that we've received from educators, which I'm sure will resonate with some of you. So how do I find time to personalize instruction? How do I determine each student's unique strengths and needs? How will I reach both my struggling and accelerated learners? I know my students learn in different ways, but how do I plan for these different instructional approaches? And then how do I keep up with ongoing student progress and continually adjust instruction based on student progress? The Exact Path learning path enables you to do all of these things. And here's some of the different support things that Exact Path learning path can do to support teachers to improve learning. So things like personalized learning, immediate feedback is able to reduce that marking because all of the content is automatically marked. It has comprehensive analysis at a variety of different scales. It allows you to reduce your teacher workload through the automated processes. It can improve on curriculum planning, improvements on teaching and learning, and key, it frees time for intervention and teaching. And here's just some of the examples of how Exact Path is being used by teachers for differentiation learning, for targeted interventions, to improve English language learning, to teach on grade level content, for retrieval practice, for flipped learning, and to support independent learning as well, and ultimately to support teachers and to support students. So that's just some of the things to think about in terms of personalized learning and how the learning path might be able to help teachers. But I'm going to pass back over to Hannah to actually go into what that learning path is and what it does in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Gareth. I'll just share my screen with you. Okay. So within the student's learning path, as I mentioned already, as the students complete their diagnostic assessment, the data that's collected from the assessment then determines the student's next step. Each child will be provided with a personalised and individualised learning path based on the results of the diagnostic and be provided with one skill for each learning path at a time. This one skill approach allows the students to be provided with that targeted intervention, to be able to work through a set of skills at their own pace with the additional support of the teachers. Now, what we're looking at the moment is an area called the knowledge map. The knowledge map is a teacher area, it's a teacher tool that allows them to monitor students' progress and provide that additional support when needed. Now, what we can see here is my class is currently working on a variety of different skills at different times. Okay, now along the top, we have what we call our learning continuum, which is basically a breakdown of the grade levels, the domains, and the skills that the students will cover within Exact Path. The shaded green area represents the skills that the student already mastered during their diagnostic assessment, and the blue boxes represent the student's next steps. Now, we actually have a couple of students within this class that have already begun to work through their skills independently and begin to master each of these areas. If I bring your attention to Amna here, so Amna has begun to work on KG level, as we can see here, verbally count to 100. When a student first accesses their learning path, they will be presented with a lesson, a practice, a lesson and a practice session before moving on to a progress check. Now, if I click into the learning path here, we can see that Amna began with the lesson and had 3 attempts initially. Teacher can quickly identify when they were taken, what sort of times they were taken, and how many times the student actually accessed that area. The lessons are fun, engaging environments. They are independently led, so the students can click into their own learning path and utilize the students' tools such as text-to-speak. We have dictionaries and different student tools that enable them to access their learning path independently and support any English language learners as well. Once the student has completed the lesson, they can then move on to the practice session. The practice session is is a series of questions based on the lesson that they've just learnt. And again, it will inform the teacher how many attempts the student has had and what score that they have achieved. Now, it's at this point the student is now being marked on their work, and we're looking for them to achieve a mastery of 80% or above. If the student achieves the mastery, they then move on to their progress check. Now, if for any reason a student does not master their progress check or does not master their practice session, the teacher would then be notified with this struggling symbol. So that's their very first indication that there's something that the student hasn't quite grasped within their learning path. Now, the teacher has a couple of options. They can ask the student to continue through their progress check, and the system will automatically determine the student's next steps depending on the results. If the student masters the progress check with 80% or above, then they will be rewarded with a trophy. The student will then be able to move on to the next skill within their list without any issues. If for any reason the student does not master the progress check, they will then be given an opportunity to retake. So we can see in Amna's scenario here, there are some retakes. So this is the first retake. This means that Amna did not master the progress check the first time round and now has an opportunity to go back through the lesson and practice to have another go. Again, teachers have the opportunity to provide additional resources for intervention and also the opportunity to review the knowledge map to consider what their blended learning scenario will look like within the classroom. How can that teacher now provide additional support to not just Amna, but multiple students within that class? And we have some fantastic tools such as our grouping tool that enables teachers to really drill down on specific domains and skills and provide more smaller group and one-to-one intervention for students that need it. Now that's the teacher aspect. Let's say, for example, the student completes the first retake and the student still doesn't master the skill. The student will then be provided what we call a building block. So the teachers will then be will see the symbol of the building block. It's informing them that the student's going to lower down on their grade level ever so slightly within that same domain in order to work on the foundational skills and the learning gaps that they're missing in order for them to master the current skill. So the student has that intervention built in within Exact Path and their learning path before they even begin to come back to the original skill. The student in total will actually have 3 attempts at each skill as they work through their learning path, focusing on one of those skills at a time. If they don't master it, as we've already mentioned, they are provided with remediation. Once they receive that remediation and master that area, they'll come back to the original skill. That process is very automatic. The system will take charge and it will tailor the student's learning path based on the outcome of each skill. Teachers will be able to see the next steps within students' learning paths. So any white boxes that we see here, this is the next step for students. Now, naturally, we're not saying that teachers need to teach their lessons in this order, but it gives the teachers that consistency so that they are always aware of the next skills the students will expect to see within their learning path. Now, often, many of the schools that we work with will use a variety of implementation styles. I would say the most popular that we find is that, and the most successful, is that teachers are dedicating 30 minutes per subject per week within their learning path and having that designated time within the classroom to allow students to access their learning paths independently. Many of the teachers that I work with will actually use that time to utilize smaller group intervention, and they'll utilize the data within the knowledge map to support that and their next steps. Again, we can also consider some station rotation in that same model to allow the teachers to have some hands-on time with each of the students while other students are accessing their learning path independently and progressing through. But you'll see here that all of the skills are tailored to each of the students' academic needs, regardless of if they're on grade level, below, or even exceeding their grade level expectations. It enables the students to progress further within their own academic journey. And each time they take the diagnostic assessment, so let's say, for example, it's administered maybe 3 times a year, each time the student is provided that diagnostic again, the learning path will reset based on the new data that's come through and enable the students to start a new journey within each of their subjects that they're taking. For a teacher's perspective, this is extremely informative and visual to enable them to group their students, as I've already mentioned, but then there are additional reports within ExactPath that administrators can then pull to see exactly what types of skills or masteries that there have been for each student, what amount of time that has been spent within their learning path, which is extremely vital because statistically we have found that when students do spend that minimum of 30 minutes per subject per week within their learning path, we see much more academic growth from them. So just a couple of additional reports that really enable both teacher and administrator to ensure that the school are seeing the academic progress that they're looking for from ExactPath on their diagnostic assessments, but also help them to really support individuals with their academic needs as well. Okay. I will now pass back to Gareth. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Anna. Just a couple of questions that's come in that I can answer. So what's the difference between the white building block and the blue one? I've typed the answer, but I just wanted to cover that. So the white blocks means that they're not ready for that yet. And it's an area they will come on to in time in their learning path. And then the blue blocks mean that's what they're currently working on at the moment. And then another question's come in, is the diagnostic assessment adaptive enough to capture students if they don't read at all? Does it go down to the level of letter sounds? If so, how will the assessment look at that level? And will students then have audio support? So the students will have audio support. That's a function that you can switch on and off for all students. When it's in the lower levels from K to 2, I think that's on automatically. And the assessment does cover the domains within each grade. So if we're getting down to, like you mentioned, those letter sounds, that will be covered within those grade levels within the assessment. You also have the ability for those students who don't read at all, you don't have to do the diagnostic to start with. You can actually start them off on a learning path at a level you think is appropriate until you find that level, and then we can do the assessment later on. So it's quite, you have a lot of different options depending on the ability of the students, but it will pick up those students who whose reading levels differ, and it does have, as I say, that audio support as well. So I just wanted to call out those questions, and thanks for those. Any other questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box. But Hannah, if you stop sharing your screen for a moment, I'll just share mine again. I just wanted to, before we cover any final questions, I just wanted to cover off to end the presentation by providing some testimony from some of our schools. So one example here is Mr. Adam Keaveney, Vice Principal at Abdullah bin Ataiba School. He says that ExactPath is integrated into our lessons and homework and is an incredible learning tool. It builds on children's learning and supports teachers' learning. It allows teachers to be really focused on students' needs and to help tailor their lesson plans. It has become part of our curriculum and an expectation which staff have really bought into. And some quotes on ExactPath intervention. The way this program is designed creates an atmosphere for success for the students that no other curriculum has provided for them in years before. And my students could eventually learn so much more than people have believed they could. And here's just finally just an example of how ExactPath can be used in different situations, especially in terms of making significant growth in ExactPath. It may be used in a variety of ways. Duration and frequency are both important to drive desired student outcomes. Our dosage recommendations here are based on learning goals and implementation models to help you and your students achieve desired growth. So if they're tier 1 differentiation, we recommend 40 to 60 minutes per week, then tier 2 or 3, maybe 90 to 150 minutes per subject per week. And that's been proven to improve the outcomes of the students. So just finally, before we wrap up, any other questions at all? Happy to field those. So is ExactPath, a question here, is ExactPath a benchmark that can replace MAP or iReady? So Our diagnostic is a similar sort of thing to MAP and iReady. If you already use MAP, you can integrate it into our systems. So instead of the students doing our diagnostic, you can upload the MAP data and be provided with a learning path. However, our diagnostic can be used as well. So it is another diagnostic test similar to the MAP, but it's our own one similar to iReady as well.
Gareth, I have a question,
Yeah, of course.
if you would. You indicated in one of your slides that using exact path can actually reduce the teacher workload. Could you just briefly respond with a little more detail of how that can occur? Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So in terms of the usage, the way the learning path works, it tailors the work to each student based on obviously their diagnostic test. So if you've got a class of 30 students, let's say, each of those students have different educational needs and it's quite difficult then to personalize the learning to each and every one of those students. So to be able to use exact path, not only for the learning path aspect, where if you've got tablet time, for example, or you're going into your computer lab, if you put them on students on exact path, you know that they're working on what they need to work on. Equally, we have a grouping tool inside exact path. So let's say you're coming to do a particular topic. It could be any topic. You click that and you can automatically group students based on who knows what, based on not only the diagnostic test, but also how they're doing their learning path. So one of the questions that exact path answers is, what do you do in between the diagnostic test? So let's say you do one in September and your next one isn't until January, but you want to know what a student knows in November. By bringing that grouping tool, it saves you that time of going through the data again, because you instantly can see this is what they know about this topic. So not only is it providing content to the students, but it's also harnessing the data that we already have and giving it to the teachers in a way that makes sense on a day-to-day basis. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
And Gareth or Hannah, we have two other questions. One is, how similar is exact path to MAP, and why would schools use both?
It's a really good question. I've not actually seen the MAP test myself, but I know it's similar in terms of it's an adaptive diagnostic. Some schools might want to use both to have that differentiation of data, but usually schools tend to use one or the other, I'd imagine. Hannah, I don't know if you want to add at all to that, but people tend to use one or the other.
In terms of the assessments, yes. But actually, I'm just thinking about this. There are a couple of scenarios actually where some schools will, let's say, for example, will have grade 3 to grade 5 that will sit their NWA MAP assessment, and then the other grade levels within the school will actually complete their diagnostic assessment. So we do have those options available. Many of the schools that we actually work with that utilize the diagnostic assessment are looking for a tool that enables them to really drill down on individual students and how they can gather more usable data within their classroom and how they can then support students with next steps. So often what we find is they don't have a system in place that enables them to collect such data. So the diagnostic enables that process. They collect the information that they need in terms of each academic level for each student, what their progression looks like throughout their academic year or year on year as well. So that's also really worth noting, that diagnostics will also help the schools and the teachers look across their academic years as well as what they're currently working on. But the outcome for the learning paths is the same. So the learning path that they're provided, regardless of whether they're NWA MAP or whether they're diagnostic assessment, they will still receive 3 learning paths for each, one for each subject, 1 skill at a time, and they will still have that journey of mastery and intervention, regardless of which diagnostic assessment that they take. So it really comes down to what the school has in place at the moment, and what information do they need in order to really support students for next steps. Also, it's worth noting as well, the diagnostic assessment enables a school to have all of their data and information in one place. So by utilising the diagnostic assessment, they have data and analytics in the account, as well as students' progression. Whereas sometimes you may find that they'll have multiple resources, such as MAP and the Exact Path Learning Path, that are segregated across multiple sort of accounts and areas that teachers might have to access more of. So that's what I would say in my experience when talking to the different schools about the different assessment types. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, there's another question, maybe for Gareth. The comment is, well, what's the teacher's job if instruction's also automated?
No, that's a really good question. So that's one really important thing we try and emphasize, that we're Exact Path not trying to take over a teacher's role in a child's education. So one of the things that we've tried to show a little bit is the amount of data that we try and put in the teacher's hands to start with. So although the students are provided with lessons that are tailored to what they need to know, we obviously realize that the teacher knows the student more than a computer ever could. So there's a few things that we can put in place, to speed that process up if the teacher feels like actually the student does know this. So we can say, we can change the placement if you want to, or you can tell the student, right, just do the mastery test, skip the lesson because I know you know it, let's do the mastery test and then we can move on. But equally, if the student is doing this as home learning, for example, the teacher knows exactly how they've done in that assessment, and they can say, right, well, they're struggling with this piece, but I know that's because they're struggling with this particular word. It's not that they don't know the topic, they just don't understand what that word means. So by looking at the scores on Exact Path, we can go to that student and say, and provide that remediation. And it's similarly with the grouping tool I mentioned before, where it automatically puts students into groups. Again, the teacher knows the students better than they ever could. So you could say, right, well, I know that student was having a bad day. So they didn't answer that correctly, but I know they know it. So I'm going to move them into this group that know this topic. So although it's automated, there's a lot of power in the teacher's hands to see the data, but also help the students along as well. Hope that answers that question.
Then maybe our last question, somewhat similar. For the Exact Path assessments, one participant wanted to know about how students might, can teachers identify guesswork during these assessments, as opposed to actually knowing the answer?
Yeah. That's one of those questions that I think always comes up with technology, especially on the internet, right? And it's something that's not automated, so it's not going to flash up and say they're guessing. But there's a lot of things that we can, as part of what the kind of role that Hannah takes on as a support and implementation specialist, is to show the teachers how to spot those clues of when they're rushing through the test. So if they're rushing, you can tell through the marking that they might have taken 10 seconds to answer that question, where it might take 20 seconds to read the question, let alone answer it. So as part of the data, and when we go through that initial training, it's something that we learn to, or teach the teachers how to spot within Exact Path. Hannah, I don't know if you want to add to that part at all.
No, I think you've sort of answered that question, to be honest, Gareth, but absolutely, as part of implementation, my role would be to walk through the teachers about how they can identify these areas, such as Gareth mentioned in there about sort of the times that's being spent, and also how they can review each individual piece of work. So teachers can actually drill down to see exactly what answers have been given, and which ones have answered correct or not. So there is a lot of, although we don't have, as Gareth mentioned there, a tool to say directly if they have answered the question through a particular method, but we do have other tools that do enable the teachers to be mindful and obviously aware of how the questions have been answered, when they've been answered, and sort of the outcomes of that. So we do go through all of that during the implementation process.
Gareth, any final comments, or Hannah?
Well, I'll just say thank you everyone for listening and taking all of that in. If you want any more information, you can reach out to us. I think you should have our email addresses and contact details, but there's a couple of extra questions on here that we didn't get a chance to cover, so I'll make sure we reach out to you to answer those. But yeah, if you want information, or we can set up trial access to actually look at this hands-on, we can certainly take that through a personalized demonstration for you and talk through your specific school's goals. So thank you.
Okay. Again, I'd like to thank all the participants. Those who have participated will receive a professional development certificate of completion for better understanding how assessment works. And even though this exact path is a specific approach, I hope that the participants have seen today that there is more pinpointing and drilling down of the strengths and the areas for improvement for each student, as opposed to one size fits all. So this does individualize student progress, and that certainly is something that is of concern to students, to teachers, to parents, to school directors. And we'd like to thank you for your time. And it's our pleasure to work in partnership with Edmentum, but any relationship with the exact path is, of course, between the school and Edmentum. Again, our organization, AIAASC, wants to provide the kind of tools and the resources for schools to meet their strategic initiatives, and certainly, most importantly, to enhance student success and student learning. So thank you for everyone, and we will be in touch with you. And we have several other webinars coming up this month, and we look forward to finding those areas of interest that you may also have beyond this assessment webinar. So thank you very much to the Edmentum team, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.